And thank you, Dari. And now we want to go live to our sister station, Spice FM, as they have a discussion touching on employer-employee relationship. And with that is advocate of the High Court of Kenya, Kefa Ojijo, as they talk about emerging trends in employee discipline, suspension, termination, and dismissal. Let's follow on that conversation right now.
Yes. That regardless of the legality or illegality that you speak of, yes, termination notices have been given to some doctors around the country.
They're null and void. I think they're misinformed.
Who?
The governors. They need to read their law properly. They need to go back and read the Employment Act. That's not how you terminate employees when they're on strike. You see, this hurry of all those are just intimidation. That's why I'm saying there are some showed intimidation that will really, will really embarrass them at a later date, because I can tell you for sure they will be reinstated. They will be reinstated. That I can tell you for sure. They will be reinstated. You see, doctors are not striking on things of illegality. Doctors have invoked a strike based on a registered CBA which is binding, on a document which is binding. Remember, this document was also given timeline of its implementation. The timeline is lapsing. It has not been implemented. The only tool an employee is given in such a situation is strike. You see? And until such a time that the now courts declare that strike to be unprotected, then they can take such a decision. The court has not pronounced itself on that yet. The court told them, still negotiate. And when you are negotiating, do not come with terms. You know, this idea when people are going to negotiate, they already have conditions. We are not going to discuss this. We are not going to discuss this. This is what we are going to discuss. What type of negotiation is that? The court told them a clear position. You cannot have a condition in when parties are negotiating in a table. That is not negotiations. Those are terms. You are giving people terms. Can you guys agree and see a way in which you are going to probably implement the CBA? The courts understand that it may not be implemented all at once, but can you give a clear return to work formula, which is reasonable, which even when presented before the court can see and say, ideally, this is reasonable. But they have refused. They're just saying we don't have. Now, each other now throwing responsibility to the county government is throwing it to the national government. The national government is not throwing it to the county government. You see, if I were one of the governors, or maybe let me say it's called the COG for the governors.
Yes, Council of Governors chair.
Yes, the chair of the Council of Governors. If I was the chair of the Council of Governors, probably I would call my colleagues and sit down and say, you know what we need to do, let us map out our responsibility in the CBA, because the CBA cuts between both the national and the county government. Let's map out our responsibility in the CBA. Let us present our formula on our responsibility. Because the national government seems like they don't care, they're not going to do anything. They have said. The president stood and said, we don't have money. All of them are now singing to that. We don't have money, period. So if we were the governors, because the worst hit places are the counties. That is where the doctors work. Doctors are employee of the counties, Map out your responsibility and then provide a return to work formula on your responsibility to the doctors, and tell them this is what we can provide as us. For the national government, we cannot do anything because this is their position. Then the doctors decide to do, they can now decide what to do with that, so long as it's reasonable and it's presentable. But if they're also now singing the same tune that the national government is singing and telling these people, you know what, there's no money, even us we don't have. If the national government doesn't have that money, even us we do not have it. So what do? You come to work or we are sending you home. That cannot stand. Those termination letters are in vain. They will not be enforced.
Okay, what happens when the timelines for a CB expires?
When a timelines of a CB expires, there are two options. It can be extended by the mutual consent of the parties, or two, the parties can register a fresh CBA on the same. So that is how it is cured. When it is expired, then it's deemed out of effect. You cannot claim it. But the parties can have a leeway by mutual consent to extend it or register a fresh one. And remember, by the way, when you register a fresh one, you are now allowed to introduce new terms or to vary some of the terms which was existing in the old CBA.
Which tells me that it would be in the government's interest if it expired.
Probably that's what they're buying. But see, doctors also know. That's why they're saying then we are not working. So let it expire and let people die.
It's a bit harsh, no?
A little harsh, but that's the reality where we are. I think you've been seeing on media, how people are suffering in the hospital. There are no doctors to attend to them, you see. But also, the politicians or the people who have the responsibility to do that also do not care, because then they can afford any type of medication they wish, whether here or abroad. So they do not care. But what about the common mwananchi there? People are suffering because of the doctors, and that is why I'm telling the higher responsibility falls on the government as the big brother, as they need to provide a way. They need to have a discussion with these people. They have, in terms of the hierarchy of the power of arms, they hold it. They can have a conversation with these people. They have a right. They have the means to provide a return to work formula. Right now, I heard they want to purchase a new presidential jet.
It's in the paper.
Yeah, they want to purchase a new presidential jet.
The old one is broken.
The old one is broken.
No, they say it's old.
Yes, they say it's
Why
old.
not? And I said this morning that
Yes.
we have aircraft that flew in 1945, which are still flying to date.
Can you imagine? And they can't pay doctors 200,000.
Aircrafts are like tractors. Those things can live
I know.
forever.
They were built in 70s, in 80s, you see. And they can't pay doctors 200,000. What are our priorities?
There's
as a
this
nation?
larger discussion I'm seeing here, because whatever we are seeing here will set a precedent.
Yes.
Now, if we look at the discussions around it, it's a one-way discussion from what we see. Meaning, the government has demands which they want the doctors to accept.
Yes.
Okay? And it is clear they are not going to accept it, from what I've observed as well.
Yes.
Now, if I look at the effect of what we are calling the economic downturn that we have in this country, where employers are letting people go, we are looking at businesses shutting down. Now, in circumstances of that nature, when businesses are in distress, people will be let go of.
Yes.
And it is never a pleasant thing when someone is let go of.
Exactly.
Because if there isn't work in one industry, it means if there are similar industries, they will also not have work, because it is the same industry.
Exactly.
What then should the legal thinking be in such instances for an employer and for an employee?
We have written opinions and proposals, even to the government in the ongoing strike. I personally have. I have met with a team of the KMPDU union leaders, and we have discussed this matter in depth with them. You see, all these people live in this country. All these people are aware of the times in which we are living them. And no one is so unreasonable that is coming on the table and saying implement it all. For instance, they are saying just deal with the critical part of the CBA and give us a proper, reasonable return to work formula. When we send it to the government side, they don't address it. Tomorrow you hear one of them in a funeral or somewhere in a rally. Already in her own decision, she has made a decision without consultation. What is going to happen? We just hear it, or the doctors just hear it from a funeral. It is a bad example we are setting, even to employers in the private sectors. It's a bad example we are setting, even to future leaders who will take that position, because then it will be a position. People will have this mentality in this country that you just decide what to do. There are no regulations, there are no rules, there are nothing. This is our position and that's it. You do what you can do. So it is a problem. And unless the government, I wish the government will come with a proper proposal and put on the table that this is what we have. What is your say on it? I wish they would have done that.
There's an individual within government called the Attorney General. Is he not the advisor to the government?
But that guy has been crying left, right, and center that he's not been consulted in anything. He's on record saying that the government sidelined him in everything. He's never consulted. The government wants to consult people like Sudi and the rest they have around. So he's never consulted. The AG has been rendered the most useless office in this country so far in this regime.
By whom?
By the government. There are no opinions from AG you can see. There is nothing. I think this guy, ever since maybe he was appointed to that office, probably maybe has never even done any opinion to the state, because they do not even involve him in anything. The other day was before the Senate committee. You heard him what he was saying. That even he was not involved in this housing levy bill, nothing, he had no idea about it, he just saw it there.
That's damning, isn't it? Because
Now that is your country.
he is the advisor.
He is the advisor
to the government.
Yes. And the person to be advisor decide, I don't need your advice. Just keep it to yourself. What do you do? What do you do?
See, I brought this up because under the circumstances we are in, one would have very much wanted to know what the AG has advised on this particular matter, because after all, it is his legal advice that would follow the fulcrum on which the government could act.
You have seen those meetings. Have you even seen a representative AG in those meetings? Nothing. You've only seen the Minister of Health. You've only seen Akina Moses Kuria and other people. Not even a representative from the AG.
Service, yeah.
Nothing from the representative AG. So even wonder, okay, fine. Suppose even guys were now to deal on the legal issue or the aspect in terms of bargaining. How are you going to do it? You see, the office of AG has never been involved in this process. And not only this, they have come out, there's an outcry from that office. They've come out to say that they are not involved in most critical matters involving the government or involving the state with other country. So I don't know. That is the arrangement. I do not know. The person you advise do not want your advice, as there's nothing you can do about it.
How does this then explain what, if we look at, because the truth of the matter is that when you look at a workforce of a nation and you compare it to what is happening with the doctor's strike, this is actually a very small percentage of people who are dealing with a human resource problem right now. How does this then play out for the rest of the country? Folks who would be in a similar similar situation, whereby you're dealing with what you could be dismissed on, terminated for. How do you negotiate with the employer? You said that the Labor and Relations Court, Employee Relations Court, actually does then try to really protect the employee. But here we are seeing that it's possible for somebody to essentially, bend you. How then can you ensure that you then, as an employee, are protected when it comes to certain things which you are viewing in right?
Now, the Employment Act, if you look at Section 35 all the way to Section 40, provide the rights of an employee. What the courts will always do, the courts are seen as the first remedy for enforcement of the rights of employees. For instance, let me just use this now, this common scenario. I've been told there are certain letters which have been issued for termination.
Yes, they are.
The first point of break will be to the Employment and Labor Relations Courts or to the labor officer. I know labor officer cannot do anything, so they'll go to the Employment and Labor Relations Court. And it will be the interpretation of that termination letter or dismissal letter. Does it meet the threshold set in Section 35 or in Section 43 of the Employment Act? When the court will interpret and find it does not meet the threshold, the court has certain responsibilities or certain ways in which can then provide a direction on that, either through reinstatement or through what we call damages for termination for this person. In other words, you'll be computing this amount up to the time we are expecting this person to be on a retirement form. You see, so those are some of the rights employees do have. But also remember that this is a point, this is a relationship. It is based on a contract more than the legalities in it. So however parties will agree, so long as it's legal and so long as there is no elements of undue influence, then the court will adopt that. So if the employer and employee can move the court and say, look, we have presented this, and the employee says we have presented this, the court is then given the opportunity to interpret and assess what then amounts to reasonability. If the court says that what the employer has presented before me is reasonable to work with now, then the court now will provide direction. And should the employee now not comply with that, then the termination letters will now be deemed to be effective and they will not be protected by the court. But if that has not been presented before the court, and if the court has not declared that, then all these letters being issued are in vain.
What are grounds for dismissal? what are grounds for dismissal that can then be accepted regardless of what situation is ensuing at the moment?
Remember, dismissal, ideally the act anticipated as summary dismissal. Summary dismissal is only effected in extreme grounds, what we call gross misconduct, not just a misconduct, on gross misconduct. You see, gross misconduct, for instance, if right now, maybe your junior just shows up here, and then start throwing, huge abuses at you, hurling huge abuses and not complying with anything you're saying, or shows up here drunk and throwing zone or disturbing everyone. Those are not just misconducts, those are now gross misconduct. So therefore, the law anticipates in gross misconduct, you can therefore enforce what we call summary dismissal. The advantage of summary dismissal is, number one, you will not be required to give a notice. Or if you give a notice, it may not be a complete notice as anticipated in the law or in the contract. So those are the grounds in which you can then invoke summary dismissal.
Can you appeal a summary dismissal?
Yes. Every termination can be appealed and can be challenged. Remember, all these processes, every termination requires what we call a disciplinary procedure. The employee must be given a chance, you see, to defend herself in presence of someone, either a fellow employee or someone who is according her hearing there, to defend herself. Then after the decision has been made, he or she also must be given another opportunity again to appeal on that decision. So, however, whether it's on a summary dismissal, whether it's on a termination, whether it's on a redundancy, everyone must be given an opportunity to be heard and to appeal on that. So, it is a process. You cannot just decide to just throw letters of termination to them and then they go. And remember, for this one also, it's the reason why it is not the undoing, it is not a misconduct from the employees. The employees are demanding an execution of a valid document signed or executed by both parties. Yes.
One of the things that we are looking at today is that there was a 19-point agenda that needed to then be fulfilled, and this is what was being discussed by the doctors as well as government. So there's 19 issues raised by them, and we've seen that now 18 of those have been discussed. We don't know if they've been agreed upon and then been going to be implemented as is. They've been discussed, right? The 19th one is the issue of intern doctors.
Yes.
And what is going to happen. You talk about trends, and that's where we started, whereby now elements of a CBA then can be re-looked at, revisited, and said, okay, guys, can we do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Those are trends that we've seen because of some of the precedents that have been set by some of the cases that you mentioned, whereby we said, okay, this is what is happening in different jurisdictions. This has happened in Kenya at some level, whereby we can say, because of the current situation, let's tinker with this thing a little bit and see a situation where everybody at least will go home happy, right? So it's possible that that be done. But in this case, where there is a complete refusal to deal with that because of historical issues, that has been cited as well. In an event where the 18 of the 19 issues have been discussed and potentially or more or less agreed upon, and this one stickler, this one issue, the 19th one, has then not been addressed, would you then be able to say that the CBA, we want to see how this 119th issue would be the one that would see how we can play around with the CBA? Can you do that?
Remember, number one, it's not the duty of the employer to decide what is being implemented in the CBA and what is not being implemented in the CBA.
But they're discussing both of them.
They're discussing both of them.
Yeah.
And as I told you before, remember, every CBA has a critical, or what we call the heart of that agreement for the parties. If we say that the substantive issue from all these issues is issue number 7, this is the most important issue we want to discuss, and then you discuss issue number 8, 10, 11, and 15, you have not discussed the heart of the CBA which they want to discuss. And it is not upon you to decide that now we have discussed 18, one has not been discussed, so we are done. Now you guys are just joking. You're not serious. It's not upon you to decide that. Where you feel as the employer that you have given your best, or you have discussed the critical issues which you feel should be as a start implementation, then you present those issues before the court and say, this is what we have discussed and what we have issued, And this is what they're saying about it. We feel that we have given a reasonable proposal of implementation of the CBA. Then the courts decide. It's not upon you to decide now we have given reasonable. If you don't want, you go home. No. And it's not upon you to decide what you're discussing and what you're not discussing. That is why the court say you cannot come with conditions in discussion. You see, just come and discuss the whole situation. Give a reasonable return to work formula where every party feel comfortable. If doctor says the 18 you're giving us is not important, give us a proposal in this one. Why will one issue become a serious threat if you can discuss it?
So does that give rise to speculation that there's just an I don't want to deal with this issue as opposed to I am unable to deal with this issue?
Most likely. You see, unless they demonstrate why they are unable to deal with it, these things must be practical and reasonable. Every person can see that, look, you're asking, maybe you're asking for 500,000. Look at our budget which has been allocated to us right now. This is what we have. If we give you 500,000, we are not going to meet A, B, C, D, which you have also allocated. So we cannot give that. Right now, what we can afford is 200,000. It's practical, it's reasonable, it's seeable. You see, but if you just say we are not going to discuss it, we are only discussing these ones. If you're not willing to discuss them, you just go. We are done. That is not now having good faith in discussion or implementation of CBA. Yeah.
One of the things that seem to be in my mind a sticking point, it's something we've discussed here at great length, is what seems to be the inability of political leaders to simply speak the truth about an issue and to address it as it actually is. So that the issue at hand is clear. It's not, there's nothing obfuscating about it. It's something you can see. And yet, when the matter is brought to be discussed by the parties concerned, what is being discussed seems to be fairly far removed from what actually ought to be discussed.
One of the tragedies for this country is that we do not know where to stop PR as politicians and where now to implement the reality or deal with issues that they are. I think our PR as politicians goes way beyond what is required. And that is where they lose the point. See, when you're campaigning, you can do a lot of PR and tell people what to do. That's fine. No one is following you. But when real issues are presented before you, can't play it anymore. See? So the diversion tactics, the theatrics of missing the point and blowing it or diverting it to something else has been the norm. You see? How many days right now? Ever since the doctor started strike?
30 what?
Yes.
33 days? Yes.
44 now.
44 now?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're in the 44th day of strike. What has happened? For 44, it tells you the lack of seriousness. Did they not know that there will be no doctors in hospital? Did they not know that people will be suffering? Did they not know that, they will be grounded in terms of medical operation? They knew this. But how they handle it? Threats, stories, they see this not working, they look for this, they look for it, instead of going to the real issues. Doctors are not interested in what you say in burials or side. Sit them down and say, look, I've heard you, this is what we have. This is the reality of what we have. This is the position. If you're telling doctors that the government is broke, we don't have money, and you've already aligned the list of CAS, you're going to employ. One of them you're going to pay over 780,000
Per month.
per month. That is devoid of the allowances and everything. Over $1 million plus one person. You have aligned the list. You've aligned the list of the things you want to do. You are building houses. You see, it's important to build houses right now. Like Kenyans do not have places to live. Now we went to hire a new jet for you. It is not being real. That is why I'm telling you, sit down and tell these people, look, even us, we've cut costs in this because we can't afford. This is what we can do. But if you're telling them we don't have money and they see the things you're doing, those are the priority for yourself, then you're also not becoming serious. I think every nation that has ever thrived has given the best to its, medical sectors. You see, health is one of the fundamentals of every nation that has ever thrived.
It's actually a human right.
Yes, it is a human right. It is a basic need. You see, those are the things we were fighting with at the independence. Yes.
Right.
You see, so up to now, look at where we are. As we want choppers, as we want, more offices, and our health is deteriorating.
Health is, I mean, I think it's got to the point where it's on its knees. Where do you see this going in the next couple of days? I mean, I think they're critical in terms of a decision that will be made. And when it comes to the law, when it comes to human resource elements, when it comes to what politics we want to play around this, where it is critical that something is resolved quickly, that we know. But both sides seem adamant, are adamant. We know the doctors have said, don't play us again. It's not the first time that this has happened. Where do you see this going in the next couple of days? And what can we hopefully expect?
The buck stops with the president as the big man. He needs to put his house in order. He needs to have his priorities right. And he needs to have a conversation with his representatives on this. The doctors are not crazy. They have been living this condition for all this while. You see, they're very reasonable. Let's give them. You see, what I love what South Africans did. They also had a similar problem in 2021. I like what they did. What did the president do? The president went himself to the negotiating table and said, you know what, I've come here. I want to listen. And listen to them and say, what, this is what we are going to give you. And ties. At some point, you need to also to understand the psychology of the people you're dealing with. You see, the psychology of the people you're dealing with. If B is what we want, and there's A, C, and F, B, you can offer A, C, and F, and B is where our mind are. Give B and then decline these other ones. You shall have still done the same thing. You see, it's just psychological. You don't have to fight with everyone.
Indeed.
Some people, you must have to learn the art of understanding the psychology of people. So I think the backstop with the president. If that is not the position, then I think this matter will go back to the courts, and the courts will decide the way forward. Because I think people are now tired. It's over 44 days. Still, healthcare is in chaos. So the courts will give direction. Indeed. But how I wish that the government just, took this a little bit seriously, and then have a discussion on the CBO with good heart.
With good heart.
Then we'll be in a better situation.
It will be an interesting couple of days or weeks and seeing what happens with that. Kefo Ojijo, thank you for being here this morning, an advocate of the High Court, as we go through some of these issues and one of the biggest human resource issues affecting the country today. Asante Sana for joining us. We hope to talk with you again in the future.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for being part of Kenya's biggest conversation this Thursday. Be careful, the rains are still coming down as you traverse these country's streets. Take care. We'll talk again tomorrow. Good morning. It's 10 a.m.
Spice up your life.
KTN News. Get the whole story.
Kitu meleta shida yote ni